Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday, the Leading Change episode this week with Mirela Moos. Hey, Mirela, welcome back.
Hey.
So Wednesday is the Change Leadership Day, as I like to call it. And we want to focus on what are the steps, what are the approaches that we can use as product owners in this case to help change along in the teams and organizations that we work with. So tell us one of those change processes you were involved with and walk us through the steps, like how it happened over time. And as you go through those steps, highlight for us the tools, the tips, the tricks and the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
Sure. Thanks for the question. I believe change management is pretty hard. And we see examples everywhere. There are so many reasons why it can fail. And very few things I've seen succeed in my experience. What has worked is dramatic shift on the leadership, either changing that leadership or having now a policy enacted by someone who has a very strong footing in the organization. So there are also the, let's say, less popular examples on like how Elon Musk went in and did aggressive cost cutting at Twitter at the expense also a lot of the employees' well-being. But that would be on the extreme side. On the other parts, it would be this more of change for the sake of change, or people trying to promote that, but because it's something trendy or self-serving on an agenda, and it usually doesn't go anywhere. As an employee, to not feel defeated by this, you can enact more than you think, and you shouldn't estimate the impact of very few motivated individuals in an organization. And I did notice this somewhere. The leading by example or driving some things yourself to the point of repetitiveness, or people will be like, oh, okay, this person is going to come in and not join the meetings unless the meetings have an agenda. So even small things like that, or this person is now going to decline the meeting because I didn't send something in advance, that can even give examples to your peer. So we've seen sometimes clients bringing in one of our PMs and then trying to move this PM to another unit or product stream, just because they said, well, I'm feeling the team over there is not doing something right, and I want your person to act as a lighthouse to also give an example to others of how they should be doing. We've also had cases where we tried with coaching. Coaching worked if it's a bit more hands-on, to the point where like some people were coaching, we were like, okay, can you share your calendar for the week? And let's look at all the meetings you're attending. Let's look at how we could bundle or structure this together. Or if you're always complaining that your stakeholders come and ask the same questions all the time, and the same people keep asking the same things like in an old movie, let's see what you've been doing so far and how you could address them, either through written documentation, through a sort of decision log. What can you employ so that you start having a bit more grounding, aside from what you're saying of people ask for the same things and people keep sending meetings to my calendar, and I feel I'm not going anywhere.
I would like to explore that a little bit more, because this sounds like a story of how a product owner, product manager evolved their practice over time, which is in itself a change, and a change that can be very useful for our listeners to learn more about. So you talked about maybe, looking at the calendar, evaluating communication strategies. Can you give us an example of that and how we can, maybe give some tools, some tips to our Scrum Masters out there to help that product owner grow?
Sure. So especially since the cost of having an underperforming product manager, product owner is so high on the organization, most of the time the organization sees this when they say, well, our developers are moving slow, or we were promised some things, they're not there. But many times it can be underperforming dev teams. So that's not incorrect. But many times it seems to be a wider problem, either of structuring priorities, of how these product managers communicate, or even highlight risks or problems before this hit everyone in the reality. And I think a lot of stuff stems from how they manage their time and attention, what things that they do, and the other problem is how they manage their stakeholders, because you do need a lot of personal confidence and to be organized very well to say no to someone way higher up, or to structure the conversation in a way that is useful for you and you don't get steamrolled where, well, we have this client, they signed, you need to do it. It's like, okay, what did they sign for? Can we check the contract? What is our leeway? What did we promise? By when? What can we get away with doing later? Do we have other people or clients in the pipeline with the same things? So basically building up this conversation away from you need to do this, or ending up being handheld by stakeholders in the organization. Many times it happens because they also don't have confidence in the PM, and the PM ends up being ping-ponged around, and then things get worse and worse from there. So I think probably what they can look at, how they're spending their time right now versus what's a priority. You can also just do one of these Eisenhower matrices, right? If you're in some meetings concerning things that are not a priority right now, or are spending some time with a stakeholder that's not very powerful or very important for what you're working on, then maybe this stakeholder can be moved to async communication, or to once per month rather than once per week type of interaction. So this has been some things we've helped PMs at, basically mapping everyone. And ironically, people would forget to put their boss as the important stakeholder to be managed and managed closely, meaning more meetings, more updates, a bit of everything. So that have been also mapping people who may be blockers and engaging a bit more with them. I mean, in a blocker, not for the sense of a difficult person, but if you don't get the budget approved by the CFO for a certain thing, or if legal blocks certain initiative due to risks, or because you are not doing some things they consider compliant or ready, then that would be a blocker. So you need to engage more often with legal, but to be able to engage ad hoc with the stakeholders or important departments that are interesting for you, it means that your day-to-day needs to be a bit more clear, so you can shift your attention and priorities towards what's important then, and not just be dragged in all the possible meetings you could possibly attend ever, or waste time on topics that are not that important.
So that's actually a very good point. So I was going to pick up on that mapping technique that definitely yes, Scrum Masters can help product owners with. But one of the things that you said is that if we don't map these stakeholders, if we don't understand what's the right level of interactivity and communication, then we might end up being ourselves kind of sucked into the ideas of other stakeholders that may be important, meaning the stakeholders may be important, but they are not the priority stakeholders for a particular release or product, right? So exactly, it's also about the product owner learning to prioritize their own work of communication and management in terms of relationships, right?
Yes, similarly to how you would prioritize a backlog. So there are some relationships that, especially larger companies, you need to invest over time in, or if they see something's coming. So one of the publicly listed clients we worked with, PMs there need to be extremely influential, because you need to convince other of the 400 plus PMs they have there to allow things on their premises. If you're one of these teams that needs to spread around the platform, or to prioritize your work into one of the things that they are focusing on. So of course it needs basically you looking at what's upcoming for them, what are their priorities, what are the North Star metric, how would this make sense in the context of what you're working on. So that takes a bit of investment longer term, but they could be also shorter term topics to take care of. So I agree with that, starting from managing oneself. And also maybe it's a bit on the organization that we've noticed in top-down organizations, when sometimes people seem to be micromanaging or they're the early stage, they see it as a lack of commitment if someone doesn't show up to a meeting. So there are some organizations where async work doesn't exist. Everything needs to happen in a meeting. And we did notice this, especially how they scale, that they end up being bottlenecked at some point where they scale large enough that everyone's calendar is over 60% meetings. And then they start
And
seeing
that's
this
very
type of
normal,
problem.
right? Like 60% is very normal for people that work mostly through relationships, right? Like decision making, collecting feedback, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but it should be less for a PM. I think this is fine for a director, head of position, especially larger companies where you have more alignment to do between others. Plus, people managers need 45 minutes or something like that per week for one-on-ones. And if you have 6 direct reports, that already takes a good chunk of your time. Then you need to manage up to leadership. But I would say that a regular PM shouldn't have this calendar. And if they do, they should look into how they could have less on their plate.
Absolutely. And that's a great place to start, right?
Exactly. Especially in this time where companies are becoming aware of deprioritizing as a cost cut measure. They should be ahead of that, saying, well, we've been spending time on this. It distracts us from that. How about we don't do it at all? And it's quite common currently that companies wind down business lines or full teams to focus on their core activities due to just how the market has shifted. So I think it's even more important for PMs to apply the same ideas as an investor or a CEO will divest from areas that are not bringing value in the upcoming time horizon they're looking at.
And a great point you just made, deprioritizing can be a very effective cost-cutting measure.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Mirela.
Thanks.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.